Hello, math humans. We're going to do 2.2b today. We're going to be talking about sign charts. This particular topic is not in your textbook. It's super helpful to be able to see it now as we get ready to prepare for calculus, but it helps us to sketch a graph without using a grapher. All right, so we're just going to jump in with an example. So let's use the function y is equal to a negative 2x to the fourth plus 2x squared. All right, and we're going to graph using a sign chart. So I'm just going to do several examples because I think that's the easiest way to teach how to do one. All right, the first thing that you want to do is you want to put it in factor form. And yes, this is an equation that we did yesterday. So we're going to factor out a negative 2x squared, and we're going to get x squared minus 1. And then I'm going to rewrite this as a negative 2x squared, x plus 1, and x minus 1. All right, and if you'll remember, I have x is equal to 0 with a multiplicity of 2, which means that that's going to bounce. And then I have x is equal to plus or minus 1. So the next thing that you do is you just give yourself a line, and I'm going to put those zeros on my graph. And I know that I have a bounce right here at 0, but at this point I don't know whether it bounces up or it bounces down. So now if you'll notice, I have 1, 2, 3, I'm going to make this guy a little bit longer, 4 intervals. So I'm just going to choose a number in that interval, and I'm going to choose an easy number. So in this interval, I'm going to choose a negative 10. I circle it just so you know it's not part of the function. I'm going to do a negative 1/2. I'm going to do a positive 1/2, and then I'm going to do a positive 10. So then what we're going to do is we're going to evaluate the function at these particular values, but I don't care about the numeric value. All I want is what the sign is. So I'm looking for signs. All right. So if I do the function evaluated at a negative 10, it's easiest if you do it in the factored form. So then I'm just going to write down what happens. A negative 10 squared is a positive number because it's squared times a negative, so the first value would be positive. A negative 10 plus 1 is a negative, and a negative 10 minus 1 is another negative. So this would be, what did I do wrong? Oh, my bad. I think that's not right. Here's my mistake. A negative 10 squared is positive times a negative 2 is negative. There we go. Whew, that was scary. All right, now I'm going to do f of the negative 1/2. So a negative 1/2 squared is positive times a negative is negative. A negative 1/2 and a positive 1 is positive. And then a negative and a negative is negative. And then two negatives make a positive. All right, and I actually am skipping a step. So in this interval, we showed that the function was negative. So I'm going to put a negative right here in this space. And then in the second interval, we showed that it was positive. So I'm going to positive right there. Okay, now I'm going to evaluate the function at a positive 1/2, positive, negative, positive, and then a positive 1/2 and negative is a negative. So this is also positive, and that's actually kind of interesting. So remember we talked about when x is equal to 0, it has a bounce. Remember when a function is positive, that means it's above the x-axis. So I'm just going to write that down. If f of x is greater than 0, that means that it is above the x-axis. And if f of x is negative, that means it is below the x-axis. So when we started and we put this here, we noticed that we had a bounce, but I said that we don't know if it bounces up or it bounces down. Well, now I know that the function is going to bounce up because the function is going to be positive, it's going to bounce, and it's going to stay positive. And then if I go back and evaluate, what was my last one? 10. Positive, negative, positive, positive, So this is negative, and then I'm going to put my negative sign over here. So now I'm ready to sketch the graph. The function is negative, the function is positive, so at this point it goes through the x-axis. We said it's positive, it stays positive, and then it's negative, and it goes back down. So really, that would be what the function looks like in that particular space. So now let me put in my grapher. So I'm just going to put my calculator right here. I'm going to go to my y equals and clear what's there. And I'm going to enter the negative 2x raised to the fourth. There's a 4. And then plus 2x squared. And I'm going to do a zoom 6. And if you can see, that looks really similar. See if I can get it out of the light. That looks really similar to what we just did. So I move my cursor and do a zoom 2 right there. There's what we found. So that's actually kind of cool because when you do things in calculus, you don't always have access to a calculator, but I can still come up with a pretty accurate picture of the graph. All right, let's move on and do another example. So this will be example 2. Let me move my paper up. Okay. All righty. So we're going to have f of x is equal to 3x to the fourth minus 4x cubed. And I want to graph using a sign chart. All right, we're just going to walk through the steps again. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to factor, and I'm going to take out x to the third, and I'm going to get 3x minus 4, okay? So that means that I have x is equal to 0 with a multiplicity of 3, which means at 0 it's going to cross through the axis, and then x is equal to 4/3. Alrighty, so now I'm going to put those two values on my function. So I draw my straight line, and I'm going to put the 0, and I'm going to put the 4/3. So then I'm going to pick my values. So we have a negative 10. In this interval, 4/3 is 1 and 1/3. So I'm going to pick a 1 because I want to pick easy numbers. And then I'm going to pick a positive 10 in this interval. So the next thing that we do is we evaluate the function at those points. And remember, I don't care what the value is. All I want are the signs. And I'm going to evaluate it in factored form. A negative 10 cubed is negative. A negative 30 minus 4 is another negative. 2 negatives is a positive. So then in this interval, I'm going to write a positive. F of 1 cubed is positive. 3 minus 4 is negative. So therefore, this is negative. Okay, so that's negative. And then my last one, f of 10. 10 cubed is positive. 30 minus 4 is still positive. The answer is positive. Okay. Remember at 0, we said that we were going to have a through and through. Well, now we know that the graph is positive to negative, so that means there's a cross. And then stuff is going to happen in here. We're not exactly sure. And then it's going to go back up and look something like that. So that would be a gross representation of our function. So now let's bring it in our handy dandy grapher. And let's look. So 3x to the fourth. And then we have minus 4x to the third. Zoom 6. And it looks really, really similar. So if you'll notice, if I move my graph right there, there's a little bit of stuff going on right in here, but the overall effect of the graph is the same, and that's okay. So we miss some of the little details, but the important thing is that we get the overarching picture of what the graph looks like. All right, let's do one more example, and I'll try not to sneeze. Whew. All right, for the third one, your function is going to be f of x is equal to a negative 2x cubed, 6x squared minus 9 halves x. So let's talk about this before we start. Basically, this is a cubic function. And a cubic function looks kind of like that. By the leading coefficient test, because a is negative, that means my graph is going to look something like that. Alrighty, so this one is a little bit harder. So because of the factoring, because I have a fraction, I'm going to factor out a 1/2 and an x, and I'm going to do the factoring off to the side. Remember, factoring basically means division. So if I took a negative 2x cubed and I divided it by 1/2 x, right? Then the 2 goes to the top, so this would be a negative 4x squared, because 3 minus 1 is 2. So then I would have a 4x squared, and I took out a negative, so it's positive. I forgot to put that. All right. And then if I do 6x squared divided by a negative 1/2 x, I'm going to get a negative 12x, because the 2 comes to the top, so minus 12x. And then the last one, if I have a negative 9/2 and I take out a negative 1/2 x, the 2's are going to cancel, and I'm going to get a positive 9. Alrighty, so that one's just a little bit tricky with the factoring. This one I'm going to leave alone. This is a perfect square, 2x. This is a perfect square, 3. Let's check and see if this works. 2x squared is 4x squared. 3 squared is 9. This is a negative 6, and double it, that's a negative 12. That actually worked out fairly politely, except I forgot the x. So for my zeros, I get x is equal to 0 and 3/2 with a multiplicity of 2. And remember that at a multiplicity of 2, that means that there is going to be a bounce. And at this point, we just don't know if it bounces up or it bounces down. So now I'm going to draw my line. I'm going to put a 0 and a 3/2. I'm going to choose a negative 10. No particular reason why I do that. I just think it's an easy number to manage because I can do that math usually in my head. This is 1 and 1/2, so I'm going to choose 1, and this is 10. So now I'm going to evaluate the function in factored form. So f of a negative 10 is going to be a positive. And then 20 minus 3 is still positive, and I square it, so it's positive. Net effect is positive. So I'm going to put a little positive right there. And then I'm going to evaluate f of 1. So a negative 1/2 times 1 is a negative. 2 minus 3 is a negative. Squared is positive. Net effect is negative. Put a negative in my little interval. And then I'm going to do f of 10, and I'm going to get a negative. 20 minus 3 is positive, squared, so this is negative. So remember, we said at 3/2 we were going to have a bounce, and we weren't sure if it was going to bounce up or bounce down. Well, now we know that it's going to bounce down. So I have positive to negative, and then I'm going to bounce and stay negative. Okay? Looks pretty good. Now let's check in our handy dandy grapher. Go back and get a new equation. So I'm going to do, from the original form, x to the third plus 6x squared, and then minus 9 divided by 2 is 4.5. That just makes my life a little bit easier. I don't have to do parentheses. Do a zoom 6. And there we go. That looks almost identical to what we did. So there you have it. It's a cool trick. Actually pretty easy. Couple of things to remember. Start by factoring, and then I'm going to find the zeros. I'm going to put those zeros on a number line. I'm going to choose some values in the intervals. I'm going to evaluate those in the function in the factored form. I don't care what the value is. All I care is the sign. I'm going to label my signs, and then I'm going to draw my graph based on where the graph is positive or negative. Alrighty, that's it for today. I will see you soon.